Every family trip was a lie. We'd saved for a year, a perfect weekend, right on the water. But for 7 years, they didn't just join us. They took over. Jessamine, darling, you've put us in the primary bedroom again? Cassian really needs the best mattress. Eleni will say sweetly. That moment wasn't about a bed. It was a ritual of dominance. It was my husband signing off on my shame. And that day, something inside me snapped. I wouldn't fight them for a room anymore. I decided to change the rules of the entire game. They thought they owned my marriage with a gift. They were about to learn what it costs to pay back a debt. Before we even start, let me know if you've ever had to sacrifice your peace for family. Hit that comment button and tell me your worst in-law story. Your secrets are safe with me, but they might just make me feel a little less alone in this story. It was supposed to be the perfect scene. A crisp, autumn weekend in the coastal town of Rockport, Massachusetts, a 3-story Victorian we'd rented right on the water. My husband, Orion, had his arm around me, and our daughter, Kinsley, a bright 7-year-old with my dark, coiled hair and his deep-set, thoughtful eyes, was already tracing shapes in the sand with a stick. We'd saved for a year for this weekend, a real, no-expense-spared family retreat, just the 3 of us. That's what I thought anyway. But a family vacation with Orion always had a silent, unwritten asterisk. His parents, Eleni and Cassian. The silver SUV, a vehicle that always felt too large and too silent, pulled up the gravel driveway, spitting stones as it stopped. Orion gave my hand a nervous squeeze. It was a gesture that used to feel like love, but now felt like an apology for what was coming. I knew, even before the car door opened, that our perfect weekend was over. I could feel the familiar, sickening drop in my stomach, like an elevator cable snapping. I'd spent all morning setting up the master suite, the one with the huge bay window and the clawfoot tub, with fresh linen and the expensive lilac soap I only bought for myself. I'd imagined a quiet, soaking bath with a book after Kinsley was asleep. That image dissolved the second Eleni stepped out of the car, adjusting her expensive, oversized sunglasses. She didn't wave to Kinsley. She just looked straight past me at the house, her eyes calculating. She didn't even say hello. Her first words, ringing with a false, practiced kindness that never fooled me, were, "Oh, Jessamine, darling, this little cottage is simply divine. It reminds me of the Cape House Cassian, and I rented before Orion was born." Her tone suggested the house was fine for us, the renters, but barely adequate for them, the owners of the world. Cassian, meanwhile, was already directing Orion on where to park the monstrous silver vehicle, not even bothering to look up. It was a perfectly orchestrated 2-person cold shoulder, and I was, as always, the receiving end of the blast. The real insult wasn't the implied judgment on our choice of rental. It was the immediate, unearned appropriation of our space. Within 5 minutes of their arrival, before the luggage was even out of the trunk, Eleni was standing in the doorway of the master suite, the room I'd lovingly prepared, not for her, but for me and my husband. She had her hands clasped under her chin in a parody of delight, and a look of complete, unshakable entitlement settled on her face. It was the same look I'd seen on every single family trip for the past 7 years. From the crowded mountain cabin in Aspen to the sun-baked condo in Scottsdale, it was always the same scene, the same demand. It was a ritual of dominance, and I was the one who was forced to be a quiet participant. "Oh, Jessamine, you angel," Eleni purred, finally turning to me with a saccharine smile that didn't reach her eyes. She always called me an angel just before she asked me to perform a small act of self-immolation. "I see you've put us in the primary bedroom again. That view is simply a balm for Cassian's back, you know. He really does need the best mattress." The best mattress? As if the queen-sized bed in the other rooms was stuffed with straw. as if a man who spent his days on a private golf course suddenly had a medical need for the room I'd been dreaming of. I felt the heat rising in my neck. Not just anger, but the shame of being so easily dismissed, so openly treated as a temporary accessory to their son's life. I looked at Orion, who was already starting to haul their ridiculously heavy leather suitcases up the narrow stairs, his face a mask of strained politeness. He wouldn't look at me. He never did in these moments. His silence was not just betrayal. It was a co-signed agreement, an emotional contract that stated his parents' comfort was infinitely more important than his wife's dignity. The insult wasn't just the demand, it was my husband's immediate, quiet surrender. My voice, when I finally spoke, was a thin wire of forced composure. "Eleni, actually, we were planning on using this room this time. The blue room has a wonderful king bed, and it's right next to Kinsley's." I didn't say it in anger. I said it with a hopeful, pleading rationality, hoping that maybe, just this once, she would see me as an adult, as an equal, as the woman who had given her a granddaughter. Eleni's smile didn't drop, but her eyes hardened into chips of ice. She took a slow, deliberate step back from the doorway, her head tilted, analyzing me as if I were a particularly unpleasant bug under a microscope. "Jessamine," she said, her voice dropping to that dangerous, soft register that always meant trouble. "After all Orion and Cassian have been through this year with the business, they need this." The implication was clear. My needs, my rest, my dignity were petty and irrelevant compared to the great, important struggles of the men in the family. The room was already hers, and the subtle war had already been won. It was more than a room. It was a symbol. It was a testament to the 7 years of my marriage where I was always second, where my wants were always a footnote to their demands. I felt the old, familiar burn of tears, but I blinked them back. I would not give her the satisfaction of seeing me cry. I would not break. Not yet. I straightened my spine and gave her a tight, polite smile, the kind of smile that hurt my cheeks. "Of course, Eleni. You two take it." I gave Orion a look, a sharp, silent spear of hurt that I knew he would avoid, and then I walked past them, past the smell of expensive perfume and the sight of their monogrammed luggage already cluttering the floor. I walked straight out the back door and onto the wooden deck. The air was cold, the waves were loud, and I took a deep, shaky breath, trying to inhale the peace that they had stolen. I looked out at the churning, gray Atlantic, but in the water, I didn't see peace. I saw a plan forming, a slow, cold certainty that this ritual, this humiliation, would end. This was the last time they would steal my master bedroom. The last time. The night was loud with the crash of waves, but inside the cramped, uncomfortable blue room, the silence between Orion and me was a suffocating blanket. He was already asleep, his back to me, the classic pose of a man who has chosen comfort over confrontation. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, the glow of the distant lighthouse sweeping across the popcorn texture, counting the years backward. I needed to understand how a small request for a master bedroom became a yearly act of emotional warfare. It all started with the house. Not the rental, but our house, the one we actually owned, back in our quiet suburb outside Atlanta, Georgia. We bought it when Kinsley was a baby, a beautiful 5-bedroom craftsman-style home. It was supposed to be our fortress, the place we built our life. But Eleni and Cassian had a different vision. They lived 3 states away, but they were in our lives every day, in every decision, in every financial transaction. They had been generous, helping us with the down payment, a gift, they called it. But with that gift came an invisible deed of ownership over our choices, especially the master bedroom. The first time it happened was the Christmas after we moved in. They came to stay for 2 weeks, and I'd meticulously prepared the main guest suite, which had its own private deck. It was a lovely room. The first night, Eleni came downstairs, rubbing her temples dramatically. She caught Orion alone in the kitchen, not me. That was always her strategy, never a direct hit. Always a quiet word in Orion's ear, a seed of passive-aggressive martyrdom. "Oh, Orion," she'd whispered, loud enough for me to hear from the living room. "I just can't sleep on that mattress. It's so soft. Cassian and I haven't slept a wink. We are just so exhausted from the drive." Orion, my earnest, conflict-averse husband, had folded instantly. I came into the kitchen to find him looking sheepish, already halfway to bringing a stack of our freshly laundered towels up to our own master suite. He didn't even consult me. He just assumed I would absorb the inconvenience, the insult, and the disruption without complaint. I didn't argue that first time. I didn't want to be that wife, the one who started a fight with her in-laws the first holiday in the new house. I just watched, a knot of resentment forming, as Eleni glided into our room, a look of serene victory on her face. Cassian, always the quiet enforcer, simply nodded at me as he walked past, a silent confirmation that this was the new order. Orion and I ended up in the smaller guest room for 2 weeks. It wasn't the end of the world, but it was the start of the ritual. It was the moment the balance of power shifted, and I let it happen. I told myself I was being the bigger person, being generous, being the good wife. But in reality, I was being a coward. I was afraid of the fight, and more afraid of the look of profound disappointment that would settle on Orion's face if I dared to challenge his mother. I sacrificed my comfort for his peace, and they both knew it. Over the years, the master bedroom became their default. It was no longer a request, it was an expectation. Every visit, every holiday, every family gathering, they took the largest, most comfortable room in whatever house we were in, and we retreated to the secondary one. It wasn't just the bed, it was the entire suite, the private balcony, the large closet, the marble bathroom. They were staking their claim, not just on the space, but on Orion, on our marriage. They were saying, without words, that they had the superior claim. It wasn't just about my dignity anymore. It was about my role as the woman of the house. I was the caretaker, the one who prepared the food and cleaned the sheets, but I was not the one who got to enjoy the spoils. My mother-in-law was the silent, reigning queen, and I was just the chambermaid who happened to have married the prince. And Orion, bless his kind, weak heart, was simply blind to the whole dynamic, or worse, unwilling to sacrifice his mother's favor for my happiness. But the trip to Rockport felt different. Maybe it was the financial investment. It was our most expensive trip yet, a true act of saving and sacrifice. Maybe it was watching Kinsley's face light up at the sight of the ocean, a pure joy that they immediately clouded with their presence. I felt a cold, hard anger that was new. It wasn't just hurt, it was a righteous fury. I rolled over in the uncomfortable bed, careful not to wake Orion, and looked out at the hypnotic, flashing light of the lighthouse. The beams swept across the ceiling, illuminating a path of escape. My mistake, I realized, wasn't letting them take the room. It was letting them think I could be continuously managed and dismissed. I closed my eyes and whispered a promise to myself, a vow in the dark. I would not fight for the room anymore. I would change the rules of the entire game. And it would start with that down payment, the gift that had become a chain around my neck. My parents-in-law, Eleni and Cassian, didn't just sleep in the master bedroom that weekend in Rockport. They inhabited it, leaving their scent of expensive cologne and entitlement clinging to the air. I saw Eleni descend the stairs on Sunday morning, draped in a silk robe, my silk robe, which I'd accidentally left hanging on the back of my bathroom door. The casual way she wore it, as if it were a hotel amenity, was a final, cold blade twist. I had to bite my tongue so hard I tasted blood. Orion, seeing the thunder in my eyes, just gave me that weak, helpless shrug that used to break my heart, but now only filled me with resolve. I realized then that my war wasn't with Eleni. It was with Orion's cowardice, and the true enemy was the financial lever they held over us, the down payment. Eleni never missed a chance to remind us of their generosity. A casual mention over dinner about how much they sacrificed for us to get the house. A subtle correction to our remodeling plans because, as she put it, after all we put into this place, we have a stake in its value, darling. It wasn't love. It was a transaction. It was the original sin of our marriage. The moment we traded a small piece of our sovereignty for a large check. The truth was, the down payment was less a gift and more a loan with perpetual interest, paid in my emotional currency. It was $75,000, a huge sum for us at the time, but not astronomical for them. We were young, desperate to escape our tiny apartment before Kinsley started kindergarten, and they swooped in like benevolent vultures. "No strings attached!" Cassian had boomed, clapping Orion on the shoulder. But the strings were woven into the very drywall of our home, tightening with every one of Eleni's demands. I began to realize that the house itself, the beautiful craftsman, felt less like ours and more like a high-end Airbnb that we were constantly preparing for the true owners. I couldn't choose the paint color for the living room, or rearrange the furniture, or even host my own parents overnight without Eleni's subtle, undermining questions about our taste or our priorities. It was constant, low-level harassment, disguised as familial concern. This financial leverage was the shield behind which Eleni fought her little war for control. If I pushed back too hard, if I insisted on the master bedroom, the silent threat was always there. Remember who got you this house. Remember your debt. The next week, back in Atlanta, I went to the small, mahogany desk in the corner of our kitchen, the one Orion and I shared. I pulled out the old bank statements and mortgage documents, the crisp paper smelling faintly of dust and forgotten hope. I needed to see the numbers clearly, without the distorting fog of emotion. I was a librarian by profession, a quiet, organized life spent making sense of chaos, and I applied the same methodical approach to my crisis. The total mortgage was still large, but the house value had appreciated significantly. The real, sharp pain, the thing that gave them power, was the $75,000 principal they'd gifted us. I needed to cut that string. I needed to sever the financial umbilical cord that kept me chained to their whims. I began running scenarios. If I took on extra shifts, if I sold my small collection of vintage jewelry, if I tapped into the tiny savings account I'd secretly kept since college, I could make a dent. A significant dent, but not the whole sum. I needed a bigger play, a faster solution. My gaze fell on the small, framed photo of my mother, Rhiannon, a strong, funny woman who passed away too young. Rhiannon had left me a small, carefully managed investment account, about $40,000, untouchable until now, held in solid, low-risk municipal bonds. It was my emergency fund, my absolute last resort. But I realized that this was the emergency. My marriage, my self-respect, my very home, it was all at risk. Using that money would mean burning my escape raft, committing completely to the plan. I sat there, the weight of the decision pressing down on me, the number on the paper blurring slightly with unshed tears. It was a terrifying, exhilarating moment. This wasn't just money, it was freedom. It was the price of my dignity. I decided that night, the $40,000 from my mother's legacy. Combined with a significant chunk from our joint savings, money Orion assumed was reserved for a new car, and the cash from the jewelry sale, would get me close. I would make up the difference with a small, strategic home equity line of credit taken out under the guise of minor home repairs. I worked out the logistics. I would need to keep the entire operation silent, especially from Orion. If he knew, his immediate default setting would be panic, followed by an immediate surrender to his parents. He would see it as a rash, aggressive act. I saw it as self-defense. I calculated the exact day I could deposit the lump sum and the careful, neutral wording I would use in the certified letter. The plan was no longer a dream. It was a roadmap to liberation. I felt a surge of cold, focused energy, a feeling I hadn't experienced in years. The master bedroom war was about to escalate, and the first shot would be a bank transfer. For the next 4 months, I lived a double life. By day, I was Jessamine, the pleasant, slightly overworked wife and mother, attending Kinsley's school plays and serving Orion lukewarm casserole. By night, I was a silent saboteur, executing my financial plan with the precision of a clockmaker. The emotional difficulty wasn't the work. It was the isolation. I couldn't tell my best friend Karis, and I definitely couldn't tell Orion. Lying by omission became my second language. I told Orion I was taking on extra evening shifts at the library because we needed a little buffer for Kinsley's college fund. He nodded, distracted, happy to see me being responsible. In reality, those extra hours were spent in the back office, calling my bank, researching closing costs on the home equity line, and drafting the letter that would change everything. I used the library's quiet, secure computers for all my transactions. It felt safer, more anonymous. The librarian in me thrived on the organization of the deception. I opened a new bank account, a ghost account, at a different bank across town, a place Orion never went. I liquidated my jewelry and transferred the money, watching the numbers grow. Each dollar a tiny piece of my soul I was reclaiming. I took out the home equity line, explaining to the loan officer, a kind, elderly woman named Mrs. Mose Albright, that the funds were for a new roof and necessary gutter repair. I even got a contractor's quote, a legitimate one, to show Orion just in case he asked. But he never did. He was too consumed with his own work, and perhaps too accustomed to me handling the domestic logistics to question anything deeply. His lack of curiosity was not insulting anymore. It was simply a tool in my hand. The hardest part was withdrawing my mother's $40,000. I had to meet with the financial advisor, a stuffy man named Mr. Thorne, who spent 20 minutes lecturing me on the importance of long-term stability and the risks of withdrawing a principal for personal expenses. I just sat there, quiet, polite, and unyielding. "Mr. Thorne," I finally said, my voice low but firm. "This money was left to me for the moment I needed it most. That moment is now. Please process the transfer." I didn't explain the real reason. I didn't tell him that this was the cost of saving my marriage from an invisible parasite. I simply signed the papers. When I saw the final balance in my new account, the full $75,000, ready to be sent, I didn't feel joy. I felt a cold, deep satisfaction, like an assassin loading the final bullet. The emotional burden of the past 7 years felt instantly lighter, replaced by the weight of the coming confrontation. My final act of preparation was the letter. It had to be perfect, brief, factual, and completely devoid of emotion. I typed it on my work computer, using the library's legal reference templates. It was addressed to Eleni and Cassian, and the body of the letter contained only 2 paragraphs. A statement acknowledging the financial gift they provided in 2018 for the purchase of the property, and the declaration that the full amount of $75,000 was being returned to them, in full, as a certified bank transfer, effective immediately. There was no thank you, no apology, and no explanation. I signed it Jessamine and Orion Bellwether. It was a lie, a betrayal of my husband, but it was necessary. I needed to present a united front to make it clear that this decision came from us. Not just the easily dismissed daughter-in-law. I needed him to be forced to stand by me, even if he didn't know he was doing it yet. The day I sent the wire was a Tuesday. I did it at 9:01 a.m., right as the library opened, a moment of sterile, bureaucratic power. I walked across the street to the post office and sent the certified letter, the one with the required signature confirmation, to their address in South Carolina. The woman behind the counter, a plump, cheerful soul, wished me a good day. I simply nodded, the heavy silence of my secret amplifying the normalcy of the moment. I walked back to my job feeling like a different person. I had just taken the biggest financial risk of my life, deceived my husband, and fired the first definitive shot in a long-standing family war. There was no going back. The money was gone, the letter was en route, and the countdown to confrontation had begun. I knew Eleni would receive the letter in 2 days. I had 48 hours to tell Orion the truth before the bomb dropped. I waited until Friday evening. I wanted the confrontation to happen when Orion had the entire weekend to process it, to feel the full, inescapable weight of the decision. He walked in, tired, loosening his tie, and immediately went to the kitchen for a beer. The moment felt heavy, charged with all the unspoken truths of our 7 years together. Kinsley was at a sleepover, the house was silent, and the stage was set. I was seated at the kitchen table, the signature confirmation slip for the certified letter placed neatly in front of me like a final piece of evidence. I looked up at him as he took a long, oblivious drink. "Orion," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the earthquake happening inside me. He paused, the beer bottle halfway to his lips, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. I didn't waste time with small talk. "I paid them back, all of it." He frowned, confusion wrinkling his brow. "Paid who back, Jess? The landscaper? The gutter guy?" I slid the signature confirmation slip across the table. His eyes scanned the document, his face going from confusion to shock, and finally to white-hot anger as he read the names. Eleni and Cassian Bellwether. The date was yesterday. The amount was $75,000. He slammed the bottle down on the quartz counter. The crash echoed in the sudden silence. "What have you done?" he hissed, his voice low and dangerous, a tone I'd never heard from him before. "That was a gift. They gave us that money. Where did you even get that kind of cash? Did you empty our accounts? Did you take out a second mortgage, Jessamine?" He was panicking, circling the table like a trapped animal. I remained seated, a picture of calm in the storm I had created. I took out a small home equity line, sold my jewelry, and yes, I used the money my mother left me. I stated plainly, looking him dead in the eye. It was necessary. It was the only way to get our home back. His panic quickly twisted into betrayal. "Our home back? What are you talking about? They were helping us. And my mother's money? Jessamine, how could you do something this reckless, this drastic, without even talking to me? This is our marriage." I stood up slowly, matching his height and his intensity. I didn't yell. I spoke with the quiet, surgical precision of long-held resentment. "When have you ever wanted to talk about them, Orion? When have you ever stood up for me? Every single family trip, every single time we rent a cabin, a condo, a house, they demand to stay in the master bedroom, our bedroom. And every single time you turn your back on me, you sacrifice my dignity for their comfort." That $75,000 was the permission slip they used to control us, to invade our space, to treat me like a piece of hired help. I removed the permission slip. This isn't reckless, it's survival. I watched the realization dawn on his face. The recognition of the truth in my words, immediately followed by the fear of his parents' wrath. He ran a shaky hand through his hair, his anger deflating into fear and confusion. You don't understand, Jess. You don't understand how much this means to them. They did this out of love. And now they're going to think we're rejecting them, that we're ungrateful. They're going to be furious. This is going to destroy our relationship with them. I leaned across the table, my voice dropping to a fierce, final whisper. I have a question for you, Orion. When we get married, we promise to prioritize each other. For 7 years, you have prioritized their feelings over mine, their comfort over my respect. Whose relationship are you trying to protect, Orion? Mine or yours? Because one of them is already broken. I did this to save us and to get back the single thing they have taken from me, again and again, for years, the master bedroom. I walked away from the table, leaving him standing there amidst the wreckage of his comfortable denial. The master bedroom was the hill I was willing to die on, and now, finally, it was all mine. The call came precisely at 9 a.m. on Saturday morning. I was in the kitchen making Kinsley's favorite pancakes, a deliberate act of domestic normalcy amidst the emotional devastation of the night before. Orion was still upstairs, avoiding the impending disaster. The phone rang, and both of us knew who it was. The ringtone, the chime that usually brought news of dinner plans, now sounded like a death knell. I didn't reach for it. Orion, however, came stumbling down the stairs, his face pale, his hair a mess. He snatched the phone off the counter before the third ring. "Hello, Mother," he answered, his voice tight and unnaturally high. I continued to flip pancakes, the smell of butter and sugar providing a surreal backdrop to the drama. I didn't have to hear Elaine's side of the conversation. I could read it all in the rapid, terrified changes in Orion's face. He started with a forced, cheerful greeting, which was quickly flattened by the force of her outrage. He then moved into defensive explanations, which were clearly met with cold, dismissive fury. Finally, he devolved into a series of panicked apologies and promises. "Yes, Mother, I understand. No, it was not supposed to be an insult. I don't know. I'll fix it. I promise I'll fix it." He kept shooting me desperate, pleading glances, which I met with a cool, unyielding stare. I was his wife, his partner, and for years he had chosen to ignore me. Now, he was seeing the cost of that choice. He hung up. The silence after the click was deafening. He turned to me, his hands shaking. "She's coming," he whispered, as if he were relaying news of an invading army. "She's driving up today. Cassian is staying home, but she's driving here now. She said she needs to discuss the meaning of this blatant rejection in person. She's furious, Jessamine. She thinks we're trying to cut them out of our lives. She wants the money back, and she wants an explanation." "What do I tell her?" I calmly placed a stack of perfectly golden pancakes on a plate. The smell was sweet, but the air was poisoned. "Tell her the truth, Orion. Tell her we paid her back, in full, and that we are grateful for her loan. And then, tell her this. We are keeping the master bedroom." Orion's face crumpled. "You can't do this to me, Jessamine. This isn't just about a room. This is about the future of my family. She's going to make my life a living hell, and she's going to blame you." I finally put down the spatula and faced him, my hands covered in batter, my eyes unwavering. "She has been making our lives a hell for 7 years, Orion. And you let her. I stopped it. You are a grown man, a husband, a father. It's time you stop letting your mother terrorize your wife and your home. She has no financial leverage left. She only has the power you continue to give her. I didn't plead with him. I challenged him. I didn't need him to love me in that moment. I needed him to respect me, to finally see me as his equal and his ally. I spent the next few hours cleaning the house, a frantic, aggressive tidiness. I changed the sheets on our master bed, using the crisp white linen I had saved for a special occasion. I scrubbed the bathroom and put out the lilac soap. I was staking a physical claim on the space, preparing a fortress for the coming storm. Orion mostly sat in the living room, staring out the window, occasionally attempting to call his father, who refused to answer. He was trapped between the two most powerful women in his life, paralyzed by his fear of both. When I heard the familiar heavy silver SUV pull up the driveway at 3 p.m., I was standing in the master bedroom, folding a blanket. I walked out to the landing to meet her. Eleni marched through the front door, not bothering to knock, her face a mask of wounded dignity and barely contained rage. She didn't look at Orion, who was already stammering an apology. She looked straight up the stairs, her eyes immediately finding mine. Her gaze was ice cold, the kind of look that promised swift, brutal punishment. She was dressed impeccably, her large pearl earrings catching the afternoon light. Without a word to her son, she ascended the stairs. She didn't stop at the landing. She walked straight past me, heading for the master suite. Her mission was clear: reclaim the territory. I took a deep breath, the moment I had prepared for finally arriving. This wasn't just a confrontation, it was the final battle for the master bedroom. Eleni didn't break stride. She walked past me on the landing, her face set in a furious mask, and went straight for the open door of the master bedroom. She swept through the threshold, her designer handbag thumping against the doorframe, and stopped dead. Her eyes, which had been darting around for a flaw or a dust bunny, settled on the bed. The bed was perfectly made, the pillows fluffed, and the room smelled faintly of the lilac soap she hated, the one I had specifically bought for myself. I followed her in, stopping about 5 feet behind her, making sure my presence was known, but not crowding her. She inhaled sharply, a sound of pure indignation. "What is this? Jessamine?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. She turned, her eyes narrowed to slits, and her gaze swept from my face down to my hands, which I kept firmly crossed over my chest. "I'm asking you, why are you staging the room this way? It looks, ready." I didn't flinch. I let the silence hang heavy in the air, allowing her to feel the absence of her financial power. Orion was hovering nervously in the hallway, biting his lip, wanting to interfere but too afraid of both of us. His silence was finally working for me, creating a space for me to speak without interruption. "It is ready, Eleni," I said, my voice low and firm, echoing slightly in the large room. "It's ready for the owners of the house. Orion and I will be using the master suite tonight. The blue room, the one you usually send us to, is fully prepared for you. I even put out the lavender sachets you prefer." I watched as my simple, factual statement stripped the color from her face. She was used to demanding the room. She was not used to being assigned one. Her entitlement was being dismantled, piece by methodical piece. She took one step toward me, and the air crackled with suppressed fury. "This is about the money, isn't it?" she spat, the sweetness completely gone from her voice. "That insulting little transfer? You think because you somehow scraped together that paltry sum, you get to dictate where I sleep? You are so petty, Jessamine. This isn't your money, it's Orion's family money, and you are destroying our home." I shook my head slowly, deliberately. "The money was a loan, Eleni, which is now repaid, and I am not destroying your home. I am finally claiming mine. The house is ours, the master bedroom is ours, and the decision on where we sleep is mine and Orion's, as the owners." I finally looked at Orion, a sharp, silent cue for him to step up. Orion shifted uncomfortably, but the sight of his mother's pure, focused rage seemed to snap something in him. He walked hesitantly into the room, standing beside me, though not quite with me. "Mother," he stammered, his voice weak but audible. It's done. Jess is right. We paid you back. We appreciate the help, but we need to move forward. We are going to be using this room now." It was a tiny, fragile act of defiance, but it was enough. Elaine's gaze locked onto him, a look of profound betrayal. She realized, in that instant, that her financial lever was gone, and her son was, however weakly, aligning with his wife. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. Instead, she performed the most masterful tactical retreat. She straightened her silk blouse, her expression turning from fury to tragedy. "I see," she whispered, her voice cracking perfectly. "I see how this is. After all the sacrifices Cassian and I made for you, Orion, for your happiness. We wanted you to have the best, and this is our repayment." She looked at me, her eyes wet but fierce. "You win, Jessamine, for now. But don't you dare think this is over. You will regret turning my son against his own blood over a mattress." She turned, a portrait of wounded nobility, and walked out, pausing only to retrieve a small, expensive bottle of moisturizer from the dresser. The master bedroom was ours, but the war had just begun. Elaine stayed the night, but not in the blue room. She opted for the smaller, less comfortable fourth bedroom, a room Kinsley used for crafts. It was another calculated move, an act of self-inflicted martyrdom designed to make Orion feel maximum guilt. She left the door slightly ajar all night, and I could hear her fake, dramatic coughing fits, punctuated by long, sighing exhalations. Orion spent the evening pacing the hallway, texting his father, and avoiding me. We slept in the master bedroom, finally, together. But the air was thick with tension. It was the best mattress in the world, yet I felt every coil. The next morning, Eleni was gone before we woke up. She left a note on the kitchen counter, addressed only to Orion. It was short, written in elegant script, and dripping with passive aggression. It mentioned her aching back, the shock of betrayal, and ended with a dramatic line about how some wounds take a lifetime to heal. There was no mention of me. I felt a surge of relief that the immediate confrontation was over, but I knew this was just the beginning of the next phase. Elaine's weapon of choice was no longer financial. It was reputational. The silent treatment began immediately. For the next 3 weeks, Orion and I were essentially ghosted by his family. Calls went unanswered. Texts were met with single-word replies. I was relieved, finding a strange, tense peace in the absence of their scrutiny. But Orion was miserable. He paced the house, checking his phone obsessively. His guilt a visible, crushing weight. He wasn't mad at me anymore. He was just terrified of being excommunicated. This was Elaine's secondary power, controlling her son through the threat of withholding love and approval. I tried to reassure him, to remind him of the freedom we had bought, but he couldn't see past the current pain. Then came the smear campaign. It started subtly, through oblique references and dramatic Facebook posts from Elaine's extended family, posts about ungrateful people and financial greed destroying family bonds. It climaxed when my best friend Karis called me, her voice careful and hesitant. "Jessamine, I got a call from your sister-in-law, Rochelle." Rochelle was Cassian's niece, a distant relative I barely knew. "She was asking me if you were having mental health struggles. She said Elaine was worried you were pressuring Orion and making rash financial decisions. She kept mentioning the house payment. Elaine wasn't just isolating us. She was actively attacking my character, painting me as the unstable, money-hungry villain who had corrupted her son. The public shaming hurt deeply, but it solidified my resolve. I had to protect my reputation, and more importantly, I had to prevent Orion from collapsing under the emotional weight of his mother's manipulation. I knew that if I didn't act, he would eventually fold, apologize, and try to reinstate the loan, effectively handing the power back to Eleni. I needed to do something bold, public, and undeniable. I needed a victory that wasn't just about money or a bedroom, but about the clear, visible establishment of a boundary. I had taken the master bedroom. Now I was going to take the narrative. The next time Eleni and Cassian had to visit Atlanta was for Kinsley's school concert. It was a required event, one they couldn't miss without looking like petty, unforgiving grandparents. I knew this was my opportunity. The concert was on a Saturday night. I let Orion tell them they were welcome to stay, making sure he was the one to extend the invitation, a small concession to his need for reconciliation. But I controlled the terms. I immediately called Karis, my friend, and asked her for the biggest favor of my life. Karis was a successful interior designer, with a flair for the dramatic and a deep-seated hatred for Eleni's perpetual rudeness towards me. My plan was simple but audacious. I needed to make the blue guest room, the one I had prepared for Eleni, utterly undesirable. But I couldn't just strip it bare. That would be petty and obvious. I needed to make it look intentionally unaccommodating to her specific tastes. Over the next week, Karis and I transformed the blue room. We didn't change the bed, but we replaced the expensive silk curtains with heavy, light-blocking velvet drapes. We swapped out the soft, neutral lamps for harsh, industrial floor lights. We removed all the scented candles and air fresheners, replacing them with a single, aggressive bouquet of cheap, overpowering lilies, a scent Eleni complained about constantly. We installed a tiny, squeaky window unit air conditioner for a retro aesthetic, effectively making the room either too hot or too cold and too loud. The masterstroke, however, was in the details. We removed the luxury mattress topper she insisted upon, replaced the soft, high-thread count sheets with scratchy, coarse linen, and added a ridiculously large, ugly taxidermy squirrel to the dresser, a bizarre, jarring element that made the whole room feel unsettling. We made the room a visually and sensorially uncomfortable experience, meticulously designed to torture a woman of Eleni's particular sensibilities. The blue room, once a charming guest space, was now a hostile environment, a passive-aggressive monument to my new boundaries. When Eleni and Cassian arrived, they were tense and formal. The moment they stepped inside, they went straight for the stairs. Eleni hesitated on the landing, her eyes automatically gravitating toward the master suite. But I was there, standing firmly in the doorway, a pleasant, impenetrable smile on my face. "Welcome, Eleni, Cassian. You two are in the blue room this weekend. We've made a few changes. I hope you find it unique." I ushered them toward the blue room, which was now less a room and more a trap. Eleni walked in, took one look at the heavy curtains, the garish squirrel, and inhaled the cloying scent of lilies. Her mouth opened in a silent, horrified gasp. "Jessamine," she choked out, "what have you done to this room? It's dreadful." I maintained my smile. "Oh, I'm sorry, Eleni. We were going for a more rustic, utilitarian feel. You know, since we no longer have that massive debt hanging over us, we decided to embrace a bit of a maximalist style in the guest spaces. But don't worry, the master suite is still light and airy." I walked her over to the window. "And I made sure this old AC unit is working perfectly. It's quite loud, but it keeps the air moving." Eleni turned back, defeated. She knew I had done this on purpose. She was faced with a choice: endure the torture chamber or endure the shame of staying in a hotel. She chose the lesser evil. The master bedroom was claimed. The battlefield was won. The weekend was a strange, silent triumph. Eleni and Cassian were miserable. I heard the constant whirring of the antique air conditioner. I saw Eleni emerge in the morning, looking visibly unrested, her hair slightly mussed. They complained subtly to Orion, who, seeing me standing tall and unyielding, simply mumbled that the room was fine and that they should just try to relax. For the first time in his life, Orion didn't fold. He had been terrified of their initial fury, but now, seeing the physical reality of their powerlessness, a small spine began to grow. The master bedroom was a non-negotiable line, and he was finally standing on my side of it. The real shift came on Sunday. Eleni cornered me in the kitchen, her voice low and pleading, trying a new tactic, emotional bargaining. "Jessamine, please. We are family. Can't we just go back to the way things were? Cassian really does need the quietest room, the best bed. We'll pay you back. We'll buy the house from you. We'll even pay you over market value." She was trying to reestablish the financial leverage to buy the dignity back that I had just cost her. I was ready for her. I poured myself a cup of coffee, stirring it slowly, allowing the moment to stretch. "Eleni, I appreciate your offer, but the house is not for sale, and neither is the master bedroom." I met her gaze, making sure she understood every word. "I paid you back not to buy the house, but to buy my peace, to buy my right to feel secure in my own home. That price is not negotiable." I put the spoon down with a soft click. "The master bedroom is where Orion and I sleep. It's where we started our marriage, and it's where we will continue to build our life. It is not a guest room, it is not a rental, and it is certainly not a bargaining chip for your control." That's when Cassian walked in, sensing the confrontation. He was usually the silent, heavy force, but he looked genuinely tired and defeated. He saw the look on Eleni's face, a raw, exposed wound of failure. He looked at me, and I saw a flicker of something new. Not anger, but recognition. He had played this game with his own parents, perhaps, and he understood the finality of the defeat. He put a hand on Eleni's shoulder. "Come on, Eleni," he said quietly, his voice rough. "Let's just go home. This isn't worth it." Eleni looked from Cassian to me, realizing that she had lost the battle on all fronts. She had lost the financial control, she had lost the emotional support of her husband, and she had lost the acquiescence of her son. She turned and walked out of the kitchen without another word. They were packed and gone within the hour. As their heavy silver SUV pulled out of the driveway, I stood at the window, not with anger, but with a profound sense of closure. The house was quiet. The air smelled only of our coffee and Kinsley's morning cereal. The feeling of owning my own space, my own choice, my own dignity, was more luxurious than any mattress in the world. The silence that followed their departure was not the tense, cold silence of the smear campaign. It was a peaceful, healing quiet. The tension in our house had finally broken. Orion was noticeably lighter. The fear of his parents' anger was replaced by a small, hesitant sense of liberation. He walked up to me that evening, finding me in the master bedroom, changing the light bulb in the reading lamp. He looked around the room, our room, and then at me. "I'm sorry, Jessamine," he said, and this time the apology felt real, not coerced. "I'm so sorry for putting their comfort ahead of your dignity all these years. I was scared of them, scared of disappointing them. I was a terrible husband in that regard." He didn't just apologize for the room. He apologized for the years of emotional neglect. I didn't rush to forgive him. I needed him to understand the depth of the wound. It wasn't just the room, Orion. It was the principle. It was the message that I didn't matter, that their love for you had a higher price than your respect for me. He nodded, tears welling up in his eyes, finally allowing himself to feel the full weight of his failure. "I know, and I'm going to do better, I promise." He didn't make grand, sweeping promises. He simply held my gaze. That night, we talked for hours. We didn't talk about his parents. We talked about us. We talked about Kinsley, about our dreams, about the future, and about how we would manage boundaries going forward. We agreed on a new rule: no major decisions, no financial transactions, and no overnight stays by anyone without both of us being 100% on board. It was the first time in our marriage that I truly felt like an equal partner, not just a supportive accessory. We also talked about the money. I confessed the full extent of the financial maneuvering, the use of my mother's legacy, the debt we had taken on. He was initially shocked by the risk, but he understood the necessity. We made a new plan together to pay down the home equity line as fast as possible, using the extra income from my old shifts. This financial burden, which I had taken on alone, was now a shared goal, a symbol of our new, unified marriage. The money had bought us freedom, but the shared struggle to pay it off was what was rebuilding our trust. Over the next few months, the atmosphere with his parents changed from hostile silence to a guarded truce. They sent polite, neutral text messages, and they even called Kinsley on her birthday. They never mentioned the money, the house, or the master bedroom again. The boundary was set, and they respected it because they had no choice. We had won the war not through shouting, but through quiet, methodical action. I looked around the master bedroom. The bay window letting in the soft afternoon light. It was just a room, but it was ours. We had traded a comfortable financial arrangement for an uncomfortable truth, and the truth had set our marriage free. 1 year later, the sun was streaming through the bay window of our master bedroom. Orion and I were lying in bed, a lazy Saturday morning, the kind we hadn't been able to enjoy in years, not even in the rental properties. Kinsley was downstairs, watching cartoons, and the house was full of the comfortable, settled quiet of a family at peace. I was reading a book, leaning back against the huge, plush pillows, and Orion was scrolling on his phone. He suddenly placed his phone down and turned to me, a small, knowing smile on his face. "Guess what I just did?" he said. I raised an eyebrow, waiting. "I just made the final payment on the home equity line. We're clear, Jessamine. Completely. The house is officially 100% ours, with zero debt owed to anyone but the bank." I felt a quiet, powerful wave of emotion wash over me. It was over. The physical fight was over. The financial strain was over, and the emotional battle was won. I reached out and took his hand, squeezing it tightly. "We did it, Orion. We did it." He didn't correct me. He didn't say I did it. He had finally embraced the shared victory. He leaned in and kissed me, a long, deep kiss that held the gratitude, the apology, and the promise of a future built on respect. That afternoon, Kinsley came running into the room, jumping onto the bed with the infectious energy of a child who feels secure and loved. "Mommy? Daddy? Can we build a fort in here? Can we use the biggest blankets?" Before Orion could answer, he looked at me. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything, checking in with his partner before making a decision about our shared space. I smiled. "Absolutely, kiddo. Let's start by clearing some space." Later that evening, as Kinsley was tucked into her bed, Orion and I sat on the porch, watching the fireflies flicker over the lawn. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, velvet box. I looked at him, surprised. "What is this?" He smiled. "It's a gift, the first one I've bought you in years that wasn't chosen under the shadow of my mother's approval." Inside the box was a simple, elegant silver locket. It wasn't expensive, but it was perfect. "It's beautiful, Orion." "Open it," he whispered. I unclasped the locket and opened the delicate hinge. Inside, there were 2 tiny, perfectly cut pieces of paper, sealed under a clear dome. One was a small photo of Kinsley, smiling. The other was a microscopic print of the words, "Master Bedroom." I looked up at him, tears blurring my vision. "It's a reminder," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "A reminder that our space, our peace, our partnership is precious, and that it is never, ever for sale." I put my arms around him, holding on to him tightly. The master bedroom was no longer just a room. It was a monument to the boundaries we had built, the marriage we had saved, and the dignity I had fought for. The revenge wasn't the repayment. The healing was the reclaiming. Thank you for listening to my story. If this story moved you, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more tales of family betrayal.